So what did Hamas really have to gain? It wasn't about Hamas gaining at all. It was about Iran gaining by increasing the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Israel. The Israelis have expanded their relationships, their diplomatic relationships across the Muslim world. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have joined and recognized officially diplomatic ties and diplomatic relations with Israel. That has never been seen before ever in the history of the Middle East, and it just happened within the last 2 years. Saudi Arabia and Israel are on a similar path to being able to close that gap and have the same kind of positive diplomatic relations. The only two countries who are still on the outside of that are Qatar and Iran. So Qatar and Iran are still holding strong to a very conservative Muslim stance that prevents any kind of recognition of the Jewish state. What you see here is a jockeying of power in the Middle East. They're choosing their time to have this conflict very much so with an eye towards the United States. In the last week, the United States has had major turmoil. The Speaker of the House has been ousted from his office after barely closing a continuing resolution that kept the federal government alive. And even then, that continuing resolution included two important budgetary constraints. First, the U.S. budget is only really allowed to continue until mid-November, less than 30 days from today. And second, that budget included no provisions to support Ukraine in their continuing conflict in Europe. That means the United States is not at liberty to provide funds for the current war between Ukraine and Russia in Europe. So now that there's a new war in the Middle East, our continuing resolution essentially means that the United States is hamstrung and cannot provide financial support to the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, of course, there are still ways that the executive office and the president can work around those restrictions, but the American people, going into a voting year where Biden is suffering from very low approval ratings, are going to be watching very carefully to see what does President Biden and President Biden's administration choose to do to support Netanyahu, who is a known conservative leader in what is essentially a lopsided, one-sided attack against the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. It's common knowledge in the international community that there is no way to compare the military force, the training, or the investment, the money behind the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the Israeli IDF. There's no way to compare the two. If for the IDF to attack Hamas, it's going to be a bloodbath in the Gaza Strip, which is going to cause a humanitarian issue around the world. When you start to look at how the future of this conflict will play out and what it means for Saudi Arabian and Israeli relations, as well as Israeli and American relations, you start to understand exactly why it is that Iran sanctioned a surprise attack by Hamas across the border into Israel, even though they knew that Hamas did not have a fair shot at actually being able to continue a protracted war. What we are going to see play out in the coming days and weeks is going to be an absolute international travesty. We're going to see chaos between Israel and Saudi Arabia. You're going to see tension between Israel and the United States. You're going to see a bloodbath between Israel and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And you're going to see outrage from multiple countries all throughout the Middle East. At a time when the whole world has been focused on a war in Europe, we are all about to see that the conflict in Europe is just a microcosm of multiple conflicts happening around the world at a time when influence is shifting away from democratic powers and more towards strong authoritarian regimes. If you like this short clip, make sure you click here to see the next clip or here to see the full podcast episode.
Freedom! So fresh, so new. Freedom!